Imagine thousands dying over a wooden bucket. Sounds ridiculous? Welcome to 14th century Italy, a land of fierce loyalties, bitter rivalries, and pride so fragile it could ignite a war over the most trivial slight. This is the true story of the War of the Bucket. Yes, an actual war fought not over land, treasure, or power, but over a stolen bucket. In the year 1325, tensions between two powerful Italian city-states, Modena and Bologna, were already simmering. Political factions, religious divisions, and old grudges had them on the brink of violence. Then, something strange happened. A group of Modenese soldiers snuck into Bologna and stole a wooden pail from a public well. That petty act was the final insult. Bologna, enraged and humiliated, raised a massive army to reclaim their honor and their bucket. What followed was a brutal battle that left thousands dead and one city forever mocked in history. By the end of this story, you'll see how pride, politics, and one wooden container sparked a medieval bloodbath that still echoes in Italian lore. To understand how a wooden bucket could spark a deadly war, we need to step back into the chaos of 14th century Italy, a land that wasn't yet a unified country, but a fractured patchwork of powerful city-states. These cities weren't just rivals in trade or territory. They were locked in a bitter ideological war that divided the entire peninsula. On one side were the Guelphs, loyal to the Pope and the authority of the Church. On the other, the Ghibellines, who supported the Holy Roman Emperor and resisted papal influence. This wasn't just politics. It was personal, tribal, and deeply ingrained in every layer of society. And the two cities at the heart of our story? They stood on opposite sides of this divide. Bologna, a wealthy and influential city, stood firmly with the Guelphs. Modena, just 30 miles away, aligned with the Ghibellines. Though close in distance, they couldn't have been farther apart in allegiance. Over the years, their rivalry grew bitter and violent, with skirmishes, border disputes, and political sabotage. This wasn't just about kings or clergy. It seeped into every aspect of life. Marriages, alliances, even trade were drawn along Guelph and Ghibelline lines. Modena and Bologna had clashed before, but their hatred ran deeper than strategy or ambition. It was about identity, pride, and vengeance. So, when Modenese soldiers dared to steal a bucket from Bologna, it wasn't just theft. It was an insult to everything Bologna stood for. And in a land already set to explode, that single act of mockery was all it took to start a war. The year was 1325. Tensions between Bologna and Modena had been festering for years, but what happened next pushed them over the edge, and it all began with a wooden bucket. According to historical accounts, a small band of Modenese soldiers infiltrated Bologna under cover of night. Their mission wasn't to assassinate a leader or destroy a supply line. It was to steal something far more humiliating. They crept into the heart of the city and removed a wooden bucket from a public well near Porta San Felice. It was an ordinary pail used to draw water, but in the charged atmosphere of medieval Italy, its theft carried extraordinary meaning. This wasn't just a prank, it was a calculated insult. The bucket, simple and unremarkable, became a symbol of mockery. Modena had walked into enemy territory and walked out not with treasure or prisoners, but with a bucket, paraded as a trophy. In the eyes of Bologna, this was deep humiliation, a wound to the city's honor and a statement of dominance. The reaction in Bologna was swift and furious. Outrage exploded across the city. What the Modenese saw as a taunt, the Bolognese saw as an act of war. Local leaders faced a shouting crowd demanding revenge. The bucket may have been small, but the insult it carried was massive. And so, Bologna began to mobilize, not just to recover the stolen object, but to restore their pride, to punish Modena, and to make an example of them. The city raised a massive army, tens of thousands strong, determined to march on Modena and avenge their honor. The war drum sounded, not for gold, not for conquest, but for a bucket. Infuriated and humiliated, Bologna responded with overwhelming force. Fueled by civic pride and Guelph loyalty, the city assembled a massive army, over 30,000 men strong. It was one of the largest forces ever raised by an Italian city-state at the time. Their objective wasn't just to retrieve the stolen bucket, it was to crush Modena and stamp out Ghibelline arrogance once and for all. Modena, outnumbered and surrounded, did not back down. Despite their smaller numbers, around 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers, they had something Bologna lacked: unity, discipline, and superior leadership. The Modenese were prepared to fight smart, not just hard. On November 15, 1325, the two forces met at Zappolino, a village nestled between the rival cities. What followed was a brutal clash of steel and strategy. The Bolognese, overconfident in their numbers, charged in disorganized waves. Their commanders underestimated the terrain, their troops were poorly coordinated, and their morale quickly cracked under the pressure of a well-organized counterattack. The Modenese, on the other hand, fought with precision. They used the landscape to their advantage, setting ambushes and exploiting weaknesses in the Bolognese lines. Swords clashed, arrows flew, horses screamed. The chaos of medieval warfare swallowed the fields of Zappolino. And then, Modena broke through. What started as a mission of honor for Bologna quickly devolved into a humiliating rout. Thousands of Bolognese soldiers were killed or captured. The once mighty army crumbled, and the survivors fled back to their city, leaving behind a field of carnage and their pride. But Modena wasn't finished. To drive the insult home, the victorious Modenese returned to their city and placed the stolen bucket, yes, the same one, in a public well, proudly displaying it as a war trophy. It wasn't just a bucket anymore. It was a symbol of victory, mockery, and dominance. The War of the Bucket had been won, not by numbers, but by cunning. And Bologna was left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. So, was it really about a bucket? Of course not. The bucket was just the spark that ignited a powder keg built from years of hatred, pride, and political rivalry. What we call the War of the Bucket was never truly about wood and iron. It was about ego, identity, and power. The bucket was merely the insult that pushed a centuries-old feud over the edge. This story, as absurd as it sounds, is a microcosm of human history. Wars rarely begin with reason. They begin with emotion. Consider the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, a single bullet that triggered World War I, or the tea tax that helped ignite the American Revolution. Tiny events, seemingly small, can set fire to massive change when the right conditions, resentment, fear, ambition, are already in place. The War of the Bucket is a reminder that symbols matter. When pride is wounded, when lines are drawn in identity and ideology, even something as ridiculous as a wooden pail can become the banner under which people kill and die. It also says something deeper about human nature. We are storytellers, tribal by design, and often irrational when our group or belief feels threatened. We like to think of war as a calculated move, but history shows us that it's often emotional, impulsive, and terrifyingly avoidable. In the end, the bucket was never the cause. It was the excuse. And that's what makes this story more than a medieval curiosity. It's a warning echoing through the ages. Underestimate the power of symbols at your own risk. One wooden bucket, thousands dead. A war not fought over territory or treasure, but over honor. The War of the Bucket stands as one of history's strangest conflicts. a reminder that sometimes the most ridiculous sparks can ignite the fiercest flames. That bucket wasn't just a pail, it became a symbol, a challenge, a mockery, and ultimately, a justification for bloodshed. For Modena, it was a trophy. For Bologna, it was humiliation carved into memory. And for us, it's a lesson in how human pride, when pushed far enough, can outweigh reason. The bucket still exists today, displayed proudly in Modena as a relic of that absurd yet deadly clash. And every time we look at it, we're forced to ask, how many times has history repeated this same story? Different actors, different props, same outcome. Because history doesn't always make sense, but it always leaves a mark. What's the strangest reason for war you've ever heard of? Drop it in the comments, because you won't believe how many bucket-sized sparks have set the world on fire